I was just watching a video about a guy who impersonated a police officer, and he was out on the streets volunteering his time as a security guard at a Salvation Army in full uniform with a badge and a gun, and at a glance he looked pretty legit. Like, if I saw him, I would just think he's a police officer, right? Like, nothing really looked particularly out of ordinary. He had a really great costume. And then he got found out because, you know, you can't keep up a ruse forever, especially if real police officers encounter you. And that raises a good point, which is, if you are living a lie in some way, it's going to come out. If you're deceiving yourself or you're deceiving others, there will come a point at which you have to face the reality, which is that you aren't the real thing. And that's, well, that's where I guess I come to an observation that I've realized, and that is that some people are able to trick themselves. They lie to other people. They deceive other people. They role play a lie. But the dangerous, scary, crazy thing about it is the reason they are so good at being pathological liars who trick everyone is because they believe that what they're doing is right. They believe that what they are trying to sell themselves as is true, and they don't see it as a ruse. They see reality as the thing that is fake. And that's probably some sort of an extreme. I don't know that narcissism would be the correct term for it. It's some sort of a disassociation with reality. It's like if I said, I'm an Elder Scrolls fan, but then one day I stop saying I'm an Elder Scrolls fan, and then I start saying, I live in the land of Tamriel. And I role play that so much that I stop believing that the Elder Scrolls is a game, and I start thinking that that's what's real, and reality is actually what's fake. Well, role-playing is great as an exercise of creativity, as a way to empower, as a way to inspire creation, as a way to experiment with things and premises in life that maybe we wouldn't otherwise be able to explore. For example, if I play a space exploration game, that's fun because I can't go out into outer space and explore the galaxy, but I can potentially do that in a game. Or playing a fantasy role-playing game where I can explore magic and fantastic places. That's fun. Because no matter what I do in this life, I'm never going to be able to travel physically to a fantasy world where magic is real and people run around in medieval attire and build castles and things, right? So there's value in role playing. It's very healthy within reason, but it's not healthy when you actually stop role playing and you start thinking that your pretense is reality. When you start lying to people or manipulating people and you don't see what you're doing as problematic. And I've experienced people like that in my life. It's been weird, but I've encountered people where they are so convinced of their own way of thinking that you can't reason with them. There's just no way to do it. You hit a block, they will shut down and they will think they are a victim. At a certain point, they will just have nothing to say other than basically, why are you picking on me? Why are you treating me like this? And they just cannot see the plain obvious thing, which is that they are deceiving themselves, and they're also deceiving other people in the process. And that's a really concerning thing. But it also ties in well with something else I've been thinking about, and that is the type of character that correlates well with trust. And I think there's some people who have a simple way of looking at life, maybe a fairly carefree approach to life, people who like simple things, people who aren't really super materialistic, people who have a certain degree of maybe that childlike innocence that they keep and hang on to and take along with themselves throughout their whole adult lives. I'm not saying that they can't do important jobs or anything like that, but they're people who are kind of simple in spirit and authentic, and they're not necessarily the most commanding people. They're not necessarily the alpha personalities. They're just genuine, and they're probably fairly kind, and they're probably pretty sincere, even if they're not the absolute best at everything. You know, like those are the kinds of people that I like. I like the people who have whimsy and space for imagination and creativity. The people who are interested in things like the arts or gaming or music, or all of those different things that don't necessarily seem like they serve any concrete purpose. They don't contribute to your power. They're not really stats that help you build a really, really incredible meta. They're just things that make life more fun, and they make you more approachable. And there's a certain kind of people that are like that, right? And then there's people who have a certain set of traits that are probably more suited for leadership in a certain sense. They're probably more interested in pursuing success. They're probably more driven. They're probably smarter in a lot of ways. They're probably more likely to ace a test. They're probably more likely to rise through the ranks in certain situations. But they give off a vibe of a little bit of narcissism, a little bit of something just a smudge off. They're those people who they seem like they've got it together, but they kind of give you this unsettling feeling that they are potentially either corrupt or capable of being corrupt. They're either manipulative, or they're the kind of people who would be manipulative if they could get away with it. They're the people who would be cruel if cruelty was something that would get them ahead. They're people who would sell you out if selling you out would be a viable path to getting ahead. They're those people who just have a certain personality that's, for lack of a better word, a little bit evil. That doesn't mean that those people are doing evil. Doesn't mean they get up in the morning and want to be evil. And it doesn't mean that they're not capable of doing good. But there is a certain kind of personality that falls into that category of sort of a is it a sociopath? Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. Someone who is lacking a certain degree of empathy. Someone who's very self-centered instead of being able to focus on an attitude of service to something higher than self. There's people who are just really ego-driven, and they're controlling and they're cruel. And then there's people who trick themselves. People who tell lies, they believe their own lies, and then after a while, everyone gets to a point where they believe them too. Maybe those are the two great risks, the threats in our society. We have people who believe comfortable lies and sell them to other people. And then we also have people who think the universe revolves around them, and they will steamroll anything and anybody in order to satisfy their personal sense of ego. Be very careful about people who can't have an honest conversation about what is the truth. There is that verse in the Bible that says, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. Well, you can't know the truth if you aren't willing to have a critical self-examination session with yourself to check to see if what you believe actually aligns with reason. And that journey also requires humility. Because the truth is, if you aren't capable of having an attitude of service, well, there's a ceiling you're going to hit, because at some point you're going to reach, it's like if you're playing a game and you did min-max your character and you somehow are smart enough to, like, you read, I guess, all of the Wikipedia articles or something. You know every single mechanic in the game. You know how to build the right meta. You know how to min-max. You know how to level up your character to max, and you do that. Well, at some point when you've done everything there is to do, well, then what do you do after that? What do you do after you reach max level? What do you do after you've done everything that the playbook says you need to do? Or if we looked at the workplace, well, what do you do after you've done all of the things that your job requires you to do? After you've mastered all of that, then what do you do to differentiate yourself from others? How do you stand out? How do you do more? How do you be and exceeds expectations in a world where doing your job is not above expectation? That is expectation. Well, you have to do things that fall into the spectrum of caring about other people on a human level, of being a servant leader, of being the kind of a person who helps enrich the environment around you so that other people are more likely to be on a path conducive to growth and service, to uphold the truth so that we drift more in the direction of free inquiry and less in the direction of old superstitions. But that comes down to character traits. Are you the right kind of a person? And it also comes down to the question of, are you surrounding yourself with the right kind of people? And sometimes we encounter people who are the sort of people who are probably self-deceived or pathological liars. And you can give them a chance. But the probability is that every single time when you give people a chance, if they have a certain bent, a certain tendency, they're going to go back to that again and again. People who have a proven track record of kindness will probably continue to be relatively kind. People who are willing to change their preconceptions and challenge their old beliefs probably always will. And people who tend to fall back on comfortable but flawed misconceptions, they will always go back to those because that's their comfort zone. So be careful about who you surround yourself with and trust your gut, because there's some people who are going to be amazing resources in your life. They're going to be a light in your life. They're going to be a source of spiritual nourishment. And then there's people who are going to be a source of some kind of passive toxicity. And I am not saying that you should have a blacklist where you say, oh, well, you know, these people are, you know, on my list of folks I ignore. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is be proactive about building relationships whenever you can with the people who make you feel more spiritually whole. Spend time whenever you can in those environments that make you feel more alive, that make you feel more included, that make you feel more loved or more supported. And shy away from the things that maybe look good or sound good on paper, but they don't bear those fruits of the spirit, right? Like, don't take the job that pays a little bit more, but it's spent doing something that you don't really believe in, or it's spent working with people who you don't really trust. You know, if you're going to spend your personal time with other people, well, spend it with people who are going to be there to advocate for you, whether you are doing well or not. Somebody said that what matters is the people who will advocate for you in rooms that you are not in. You know, and you're never going to know what people will do for you behind the scenes to advocate, to try to help you. But you can kind of tell what kind of folks people are at a glance. Quite often, if you trust your gut, your first feeling about what kind of people you're around is probably true. You know, if you go down the dark alley in the city you don't know and it doesn't quite feel safe, probably isn't. You probably should listen to your feelings, you know? If you feel like somebody is a kind person and you like them, they probably are a kind person and they're probably worth spending time with, right? If somebody feels like they're a little bit kind of sketchy or their motives don't feel quite right, well, probably that's true too. And so always be I guess, trust your instincts when you are looking for social connections with other people, because there's so many different traps that you can fall into to find yourself in a place where maybe the technicals look good, but the fundamentals beneath the metrics aren't very good. And, being in an environment where you're surrounded by people who you respect and people who respect you and people who respect the truth and people who have naturally good intentions instead of selfish ones or dishonest ones or self-deceptive ones. That's important, because it's very difficult to grow if you are putting yourself into an environment where you are surrounded by weeds and toxic things. So always try to surround yourself with the people who you'd want to be more like, so that you can drift in their direction. And think about maybe something like whether you would want to work for somebody. Well, that's probably the kind of person you should try to be. It's probably the kind of person you should try to be around. When I think about the kind of people I would be willing to work for, I don't think about somebody who's the smartest necessarily. I don't think about somebody who's going to have all of the winning metrics on some sort of a PowerPoint presentation. I think about somebody who I trust. So that is the most powerful commodity of all, isn't it? Not what you do, but the trust that you command, and surrounding yourself with others who you trust as well. Wherever you find yourself, good luck on your adventure. Till next time. Thanks so much.